I spent the past week playing Stellar Blade, and it's the best gacha game I have ever played. Fortunately, it's not a gacha game, but that's what makes it so interesting, so let's talk about that. Before we do, I want to give my thoughts on the game as a whole, so anyone watching won't be confused about some of the things that I say. Stellar Blade is an exciting game for me, even if it's not that great. It's pretty good. It does some things very well and other things very poorly. I view Stellar Blade in the same way I do Lies of P. It's a studio that is truly pushing itself out of its comfort zone in designing something so much larger in scope than their prior work. Lies of P was a first-time attempt at something notoriously difficult to do well, and so is Stellar Blade. I can't help but feel excited and positive about that, even when the return isn't some genre-defining masterpiece, because here's the thing, it doesn't need to be. This may not be a great thing to do as a critic, but I can't help but grade these games on a curve because that's just being honest to my outlook. I want these kinds of games to succeed because we need more new blood in the industry getting hefty sums invested in them to iterate on standard genre archetypes. Stellar Blade is an action RPG. I lightly place it into the Souls-like camp. I would call it a third-generation Souls-like, one that has renewed focus on combat and reaction time-driven mechanics such as perfect dodges and parries. It also has the D-pad ability system that has become oh so popular in the action RPG space, likely thanks to God of War and Assassin's Creed Origins popularizing it as a system. Its biggest inspiration, though, is of course Nier, an action JRPG that released in 2017, which I didn't really like. Put down your pitchforks. I appreciated the aesthetic. I felt like it was conceptually fascinating, but playing it, I didn't connect with the combat at all, which is what is so fun about Stellar Blade. It's like Nier, but with a combat system that speaks to me, even if it has its flaws as well. But that's not the only element that it has liberally taken from Nier. The music, to put it lightly, is an homage, although like Nier's soundtrack, it is the best part of the game. It's awesome, and it wasn't uncommon for me to go to bed humming the Wasteland theme. The conceptual inspiration also translates to its narrative inspiration. The story, though, is limp, to say the least. Talking about limp, the character design is a not-so-subtle fusion of 2B's quasi-titillation distilled through the hands of a 14-year-old boy. It's like the "you can borrow my homework, just change the wording a little" meme, but in this case, every single word is replaced by a misappropriated synonym, if that makes sense. I talk about our protagonist, Eve, in my Death of the Game review video, so I don't want to harp too much on it, but her design is just really not good in my opinion, and that isn't because it's horny or objectifying or anything else that the rage bait peddling culture warriors are pretending people are triggered by. It's because it's a little garish and over-designed on every conceivable level. It's like a mishmash of colors and textures and physics, and it's all over the place in every way 2B isn't. The character Eve is most inspired by, ironically, is not only tamer and more conservative, but a lot more thematically appropriate for the world it belongs to. 2B is dressed as a maid, a servant, physically blindfolded, disconnected from the truth before her very eyes. It's a blunt form of characterization through character design, but it's undeniably effective in the very same breath as it is attractive. That's part of what made 2B such a beloved character. That's why you can't go to any convention without seeing a dozen cosplayers dressed as her. Hell, my girlfriend spent the better half of the last convention she went to dressed as her. I don't think Eve will have even a fraction of that cultural significance, in no small part due to how ridiculous her outfit is and how much emphasis there is on dressing her up. That is part of the game, after all. Eve is a silicone Barbie doll for grown men to dress in all kinds of anachronistic skins that make the already out-of-place character look even more absurd, which heavily detracts from the already struggling story. If you aren't one to get invested in hundreds of collectible text logs or unskippable cutscenes wherein two characters stand around telling each other things, then that won't be any easier if one of those characters is wearing lingerie. If anything, it makes the sincere storytelling unintentionally hilarious. You have characters dying, crying, and dying again, all the while your real doll is jiggling and bobbling around like a 18+ Skyrim mod. It's so stupid, it's almost endearing. Toward the latter half of the game, when I had fully disconnected from the story in no small part because of this, I found a fun metagame out of picking the most inappropriate outfit for whatever cutscene was about to play. I would be remiss to not point out the stylistic deviations between the world, Eve, and even some of the side characters too. For example, Lily, one of the secondary protagonists, doesn't even look like she belongs in the game. She is stylistically different to Eve, looking like an Uncanny Valley stylized cartoon character. Regardless, the story not being up to snuff should not be surprising to anyone who has played 95% of all action RPGs. The characterization here is dry and unfocused. I single out Eve because she is as incoherently characterized as she is visually designed. On one hand, they're going for the 2B vibe as a disconnected, borderline autistic android clueless about the world or apparently how short her skirt is, but on the other hand, she's crying and shouting and shitting her way through some of these cutscenes. Pick a lane, lady, stick to that lane, and only swerve when the narrative demands it. The greatest irony of Eve's design is how sexless she is as a character. While wearing your little brother's favorite Nexus mod override, she is utterly without desire. There was a moment where Eve was ambushed and literally stabbed in the back by a group of looters only to be saved by our partner Adam and then repaired in the hub area. It was a dramatic scene, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought that it will lead to a budding romance between someone who is conceptually human and this silicon doll, but no, the drama faded, as did the cutscene, and we walk back into the overworld with absolutely nothing having changed. It's just not inspired, and it seems as though even the director agrees, although I can't say I'm particularly interested in a version of Stellar Blade that has an even greater focus on story, because if it misses again, the barrage of unskippable cutscenes may be even harder to sit through. I'm looking at you, Monster Hunter Wilds. The most charming part of Eve's character is her fascination with old cans. These are collectibles that you can find all around the game world, and as you do, she picks them up and strikes a pose. I like this, it's kinda cute. I wish there was dialogue for each can even. Some levity to her character would have done well to break up her staccato delivery. But that's almost all the negatives. The story's bad, the character looks stupid, not because she's conventionally attractive and hypersexualized, but because both of these elements are done in an uninspired and thematically inappropriate way. And finally, the RPG systems are a bit too light for my taste. There is barely any variety in this game, and while the individual levels have some fun exploration, the reward for doing that is usually a cosmetic outfit or just a whole host of random currency. The most you can do from an itemization standpoint is change some minor passives and filter through the skill tree. The skill tree itself is solid, although again, very simple. You get 4 abilities and you unlock 4 more later on. It's all super standard. I would have loved to see added depth in all of this, because another similar game, the first Berserker Kazan, managed to showcase just how impressive combat can feel when buoyed by exceptional itemization. In Kazan, just about every armor set had unique bonuses that either changed your playstyle, augmented an ability, or in some cases added an entirely new ability to your rotation. On top of that, there were 3 weapons, each of which having a skill tree no less complex than Stellar Blades. That game is a modern-day gold standard for action RPGs in my eyes. Stellar Blade excels in different ways. It makes a pretty tame first impression. It can feel floaty and unimpactful at first, but once you start getting your baseline abilities unlocked and some of the combos figured out, it clicks. The combat is flashy, kinetic, and satisfying. The parries are generous, but that's fine. We don't need 9-frame parry times like in Lies of P. I prefer a system that values fun over frustrating difficulty. With that said, Stellar Blade can be a bit too easy for most of its runtime, sad considering how linear the progression is. There is no way to break the game with a crazy build, so I would have expected tighter tuning in some of the encounters, but the vast majority of fights I ended up just kind of one-shotting. There is also platforming that is the architecture for most of your exploration. It starts off as a little confusing with the heavy reliance on scanning systems to showcase where you can and can't grapple to, but eventually becomes second nature, and hopping your way through the post-apocalypse becomes even more fun when paired with the mid-game unlock of a double jump, something that you won't see much footage of because the vast majority of what you're seeing is from the early game to avoid spoilers. Once you finish the first area, you enter the main city, Zion, and from there are ushered into the Wasteland. An open zone area that you are free to explore, picking up side quests, solving puzzles, and generally bounding between as you complete the campaign missions. This is where the game took on a different overcoat in my mind. Metaphorically, it was wearing Eve's absurd-looking base skin. However, once this shift happened, it suddenly wore the bunny onesie. Does that make sense? Because for all of the points of inspiration that this game wears on its sleeve, from Nier to Dark Souls, it felt like it was most inspired by the new wave of gacha games, Genshin Impact, Withering Waves, and all of their other brethren. Maybe I'm putting the chicken before the egg here, but there was something about stepping into a Genshin Withering Waves-esque open zone that is chock full of random little puzzles that are incredibly easy to solve that kind of triggered something in me. All these puzzles result in you finding or unlocking a loot crate that gives you some kind of currency after all, usually in the form of flying little doodads of various different colors that land all around you. Genshin's overworld design is somewhat innovative in that it forgoes a standard checkbox-driven system like you'd see in a Ubisoft game in favor of catching your eye diegetically in the world itself. And I think I speak for many people when I say that my favorite part of the game is exploring its world. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle board. But my experience with Genshin, Withering Waves, and its ilk was cut short thanks to almost everything else. The free-to-play gacha systems are there to throttle your actual gameplay. It needs to be limited in scope and engagement because otherwise you'd progress too quickly and not consider its monetization all too much. The loop, once you're done with the bulk of the linear game, becomes that of monotonous daily missions that neither challenge or interest you, so you can collect enough of the scarcely peddled V-Bucks to RNG roll your way to a new character. The open-ended and fun design of the world is antithetical to monetization. Time and time again, I found myself wishing that I could just pay full price and just play the game. And sure, every large content update could be a paid DLC, that's fine, as long as there was none of this nonsense diluting an otherwise fun experience. Maybe it's controversial to say, but I thought back when I played Genshin Impact for a little while that it would genuinely be a great game if it wasn't persistently held back by its monetization. Stellar Blade feels like a gacha game converted into a single-player experience, the very kind of experience that I wished games like Genshin were. But how? Well, we already touched on some of it, the layout of the world, for example. There are two large open zone sections in Stellar Blade. Sadly, they're both variations on a desert theme. Each zone hosts a bunch of different paths, secrets, collectibles, mostly delivered through hidden and not-so-hidden chests scattered around, many of which are obtained through rudimentary puzzle solving no less. Sometimes you're shimmying an orange cube so you can use it as a platform to hop on, other times you're shooting floating targets that drop down ropes to climb, or playing small minigames for a passcode. These chests also integrate with the same Nier inspiration, as Stellar Blade has multiple quote-unquote hacking minigames. Sometimes you need to plug a code in you find elsewhere, other times you're quickly inputting buttons on your D-pad. Side note, in the second zone, you unlock fishing as a side activity. It's loads of fun and well integrated for a game like this. After solving a chest puzzle, you kick it open only to be greeted with a spray of currency. This is the standard for this genre and its inspirations. I mean, look at The First Descendant, a game that I often confused for Stellar Blade a year or so ago. Same engine, similar sexuality, and of course, similar doodads. That's not a euphemism, the loot operates in close alignment, and that makes sense considering The First Descendant is freemium, microtransaction driven, but it isn't a gacha. Neither is Stellar Blade, honestly, but that's due to the way these systems have been adapted. I can imagine an alternate evil dimension where this was created as a gacha game, where you have multiple blades to pick from, where Zion is a multiplayer hub area, and where many of the anachronistic skins we talked about earlier are earned from a battle pass or cosmetic shops or loot boxes. The ethos of these cosmetics falls in line with a cash shop that never manifested. A solid 90% of them are so disconnected from the game world. biker outfits, magician outfits, bunny girl outfits, bikinis, things that don't make sense in a post-apocalypse but do make sense on a post-apocalyptic cash shop. It's as though you're taking a peek behind the curtain of what could have been in a free-to-play live service version of the game. I am grateful it isn't that, but seeing these kinds of systems dot every facet of Stellar Blade is interesting to observe nevertheless. Hell, there's even a star system for the gear, nothing outwardly crazy, but it's funny considering just how ubiquitous that is within the gacha space. This is of course without mentioning the studio's other title, Goddess of Victory Nikki, a free-to-play gacha shooter whose profits surely played a role in getting Stellar Blade made. It's a mobile game, so all of its monetization is expected, but it's interesting how much of that ethos carries forward in Stellar Blade without the predatory MTX. In fact, after having watched a bit of Goddess of Victory Nikki gameplay, I have concluded that it is a core source of inspiration for their work here as well. Obviously, the very same kind of hypersexualization is present, but also the post-apocalyptic world design looks to use identical or at least heavily inspired concept art. The UI is reminiscent of Stellar Blade, and so are the aesthetics. Maybe you can take the gacha out of the game, but you can't take the gacha out of the vision. I've heard through the grapevine that their gacha outing is more competent in its storytelling, but I'm unsure how much I believe that considering it looks to have the same sort of dissonance between aesthetic and narrative that Stellar Blade does. And while I may not like or support gacha in its basic form, I do at least support using those funds to create something that is less predatory. We're in a new generation of gacha gaming. I can only speak on this as a layman looking into the thriving culture that is gambling through video games. However, what I've taken notice of is the competence of the games packaging these monetization schemes. MiHoYo games may all look very similar and have since birthed what feels like a dozen of copycats, but they are all undeniably impressive in what they offer. Years ago, I always associated gambling-driven games with mobile slop, a whole host of UI prompts asking you to click through shining menus to receive a pittance of currency that eventually funnels you into a cash shop. Low quality, homogenized art, an unnecessary story, and barely any gameplay, often taking the form of an auto-battler. Now, the standard has been raised. We're predisposed to expect actual RPGs, whether those be open world or open zone. The expectation has become a good game first. Gacha systems are now attached to what otherwise would be acceptable or even great, but of course detract for many users such as myself from the core experience. I'm sure I'm not the only one to feel this way, and while I'm okay with this genre existing, I can't help but wish the higher quality outings weren't dragged down by effectless monetization. This isn't just my rejection of the presence of it, but rather an acknowledgement of how its presence impacts the rest of the game's design. If you're creating a free-to-play game, you are of course including a cash shop, and with that, designing systems that psychologically and literally push players to it. All of the RNG-driven gambling is a design choice driven by the model, and if it weren't for the model, then these choices would have likely been more player-friendly. All of the endless dailies and weeklies and monthlies and battle passes and menus ready to dish out a crumb of currency would likely not exist, and what would be left would be immediately persistent and satisfying as an experience. You could play through the game at your own pace. That does pose the issue of future content and likely why live service games opt for subscription models. Not just literal monthly subscriptions, but psychological ones as well, systems to retain a more collectively invested segment of the demographic through daily and weekly incentives. To return all the way back to Stellar Blade, it feels like all of that minus the freemium gacha model. It had everything besides the retention mechanics and gambling, which is why it is a shorter, linear experience that won't receive a constant influx of content updates, but also why it, to me, is so much more rewarding to manage. Stellar Blade isn't a perfect game, it certainly holsters a specific set of subjective flaws, but it's also a demonstration of influence that remains unaffected by monetization. In that sense, it manages to evoke the ethos of a passion project and less so a corporate AAA product. And that's despite the aesthetic being everything but. To my surprise, Stellar Blade managed to deliver what I've always wanted from the new generation of gacha games, just the game itself.